All right. So what to get started? So first, maybe just start off. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Maybe a thumbs up. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. So firstly, I just want to start off by thanking you all for taking a precious time out of your evenings to tune into this webinar. I really hope that this webinar would not just be a presentation, but a conversation. That wouldn't just be an informative session, but perhaps even a transformative experience. And so without further ado, how about we get started? So just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Jackie. I'm a registered psychotherapist qualifying here in Ontario, and I currently practice here at Shift Collab. And in my practice here at Shift, I journey with clients from all walks of life, but I have a specialty with journeying with individuals who are dealing with major life transitions, cross-cultural issues, and faith-related challenges. And so that's just a little bit about me. And so now I want to switch gears and just turn to our agenda for today. So first, we're going to start with a little warm-up activity, just to get us ready to engage this topic of assertiveness. And then following this activity, we're going to take a close look at what is assertiveness, what it isn't, and how we are to understand it. And then we're going to follow that up with exploring the benefits and also the challenges of adopting an assertive communication style. And then lastly, we're going to explore the topic of how do we become more assertive in our communication. And so now we're going to start with our little warm-up activity. It's nothing crazy, nothing fancy. This activity is very simple. So different statements are going to pop up on the screen. And what we're going to do is have you just use the raise hand function if you feel like the statement on the screen applies to you. And before moving on to the next statement, I'll just signal everyone to lower your hands before we move on to the next statement. Though it is very possible that every statement may resonate with you. So before we start, just want to do a quick check-in and see if there are any questions or concern about this, how this warm-up activity works. Feel free to use the chat or simply unmute yourself. Okay. If not, then let us begin. I generally like to keep my opinions to myself. Okay, let's lower our hands. I give people the space to express themselves, but not at my expense. Thank you. Let's lower our hands. Confrontations are intimidating to me. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to the next statement now. Let's lower our hands. I often struggle with articulating my needs. Thank you, everyone. Let's lower our hands. I know and maintain my boundaries well. Okay, thank you all. Let's lower our hands. And now I would like to, just invite anyone to the floor if you want to unmute. Feel free to unmute yourself, or just you can communicate in the chat as well. I just wanted to just give an open question of what was the activity like for you to experience, and I wonder what was a particular statement that particularly like just stood out for you. I see. It's good to be interactive and just kind of make it open for everyone to engage with. See, one of our participants here. I'm just looking in the chat, so don't mind me if I'm looking away from the screen. I think it's good to make us aware that may or may not be aware of it. Wow. Same as maybe realize I have no boundaries and I will bend for other people at the expense of myself. Wow. Wow. I thank everyone for just being so transparent and sharing about your experiences. And I think this is really just enriches the webinar experience, all of your input. And I think this is also a good segue for us to start talking about this topic of assertiveness, because I think it's something that many of us want to develop, but it's also something many of us are scared of. And I think it's partially because we're not really sure what being assertive actually means, or what assertive actually looks like. And so what we're going to explore together now is that we're going to look at what assertiveness is. And so assertiveness at its core is a style of communication. It's a style of communication that is characterized by an acknowledgement of ourselves without the expectation that others will welcome it. And now, I don't know how this sounds. It might sound forceful or even obnoxious, but it shouldn't be viewed that way at all. Because being assertive is not about forcing control over others, but exerting control over ourselves. It is about being responsible over our own feelings and trusting others to be responsible over their own. And so this might look different for some people, but assertiveness in action might sound something like, hey, babe, I noticed that you joke about this subject a lot. I'd appreciate it if you didn't, because it makes me upset. Or it might sound like, hey guys, I'm gonna head out early from this party just to make sure I catch the last train. Or it might sound like, hey, I'd love to help, but I don't have the capacity to take on more work at this moment in time. So that's what assertiveness is. And that's what assertiveness might sound like. But what are the benefits of adopting an assertive communication style? So what are the benefits of practicing assertive communication? Right? Practicing assertive communication has benefits for our health. There's been research studies that have found that individuals who practice assertive communication experience less depression, less anxiety, and have a greater self-esteem. Assertive communication also benefits our relationships, because when we can communicate our needs assertively and clearly, our partners don't need to play the good old guessing game, which allows our relationships to resolve conflict more easily and more efficiently. Assertive communication also benefits our future. So often, career advancements and salary raise opportunities are really just on the table waiting for us, but we just can never bring ourselves to ask. And so being able to communicate assertively has financial and future implications as well. And so you see, when we practice assertive communication, it can enrich our lives in many different ways and on very different levels. Now, as much as it is beneficial for us to practice assertive communication, it doesn't come without its challenges. And so generally speaking, what really makes it hard for us to practice assertive communication is stress. And stress is that uncomfortable feeling we experience when we perceive that we are under attack or under some sort of threat. We feel this when someone cuts in front of us in the morning, commute as we drive downtown. We feel it when a manager assigns us more work and we feel like we can't say no. This stress is what triggers us in a fight, flight, or freeze response, where we may feel compelled to flee the situation, to fight the situation, or just be paralyzed by it altogether. And the thing is, stress is useful, actually, because it propels us into action. It pushes us to run when we're being chased by a bear. It pushes us to fight when we're faced with a threat. But the only problem is the everyday work and school situations that we face are not the sort of dangers. These are not the sort of dangers that we face all the time. And so our responses in these cases do not match the threat that's actually in front of us. And so stress really is the main barrier, but it has different sources. Sometimes it comes from our beliefs. Some of us believe that assertiveness is obnoxious, that it is wrong, that it is selfish. But as we have explored today thus far, as we've established, that is not the case. Sometimes we get stress from our culture. We feel pressure to be more passive and submissive because we're taught that these are virtues, that it is a good thing to put our needs on hold, to sacrifice for the greater good. Sometimes the source of our stress is just from our experiences. Perhaps we've tried to be assertive in the past, but we just got so much backlash that we never want to do that ever again. And so these are all barriers that hinder assertive communication. So a roadmap to building assertiveness, right? So first I want to say the reason there's a roadmap for building assertiveness is because assertiveness is not something you're simply born with, but it's a capacity you can develop. And again, assertive communication is not a matter of imposing control over others, but exerting control over ourselves and entrusting others with the same responsibility. And so with that said, how do we get there? How do we get to the promised land of assertive communication? So the first thing I'd like to say is that a lot of the ideas explored in tonight's presentation come from Randy J. Patterson, who is a brilliant clinical psychologist who wrote a fantastic assertiveness workbook, right, for people to build up their capacity to communicate assertively. And so this is a book that I would really recommend if you want to sort of build up on these skills. So that's a resource I want to recommend to you. But before I talk about more of the practical things we can do to build up our ability to be assertive, I think it all comes back, firstly, to how we understand assertiveness. Because that definition, that belief, is what will hold you back or propel you forward. So first, we need to unlearn what has been taught to us about assertiveness and adopt a new definition, a proper, true definition of what it really means. So that's the first thing. And one exercise that I attribute to Dr. Patterson is something that we can practice day to day, which is what he calls delaying agreement, which is just a fancy way of saying, don't agree with people immediately, but explain that you need some time to get back to them. Because you see, for some people, saying no is like so hard. But this exercise serves as a gateway towards communicating more assertively. By saying no or putting a delay to requests that you can't attend to in the moment. And once we do that enough, it becomes more natural to make space for ourselves because it is our space. It is our space to assert ownership over. And so what this might look like is that if someone asks if you can go to the movies with them this weekend, you can say, hey, I'm not sure, but I'll get back to you in a few days. And so I want you guys to notice the key here. The key here is number one, not to apologize. And number two, not ask for permission. Because it's so instinctive. It's in the fiber of our being to say, hey, I'll get back to you in a few days, if that's okay. But we don't have to include that last part because it is okay. Even if they try to make us believe otherwise, it's still okay. Now, another thing that I might suggest is counseling, because oftentimes learning skills is not enough. Because, like I said, those beliefs around what assertiveness can be so strong, it can be so fixed that we can't deal with them alone. And so in those instances, I think counseling is an option to consider. And I want to assure you, this is not a webinar to promote our counseling services. But I truly mean it, that you can go see a counselor elsewhere for all I care, but please consider it as an option. But something else I want to offer and go into more depth with is a technique I have here on the next slide. Right. So DEAR is a modified version of a technique that comes from DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, which can be simplified into the acronym DEAR. The D here stands for describe. It calls for us to describe our observations neutrally. E calls for us to express our feelings around those observations. A calls for us to assert our requests regarding those observations. And R calls for us to reinforce our request by explaining the significance of our request. And so in the following slide, I have an example to sort of make sense of all this, to make this practical for us. So to describe, I notice that you zone out when I talk about my day. Express, this makes me feel sad and lonely. And assert, I would appreciate it if you could be more present. Reinforce, I think it would benefit our relationship and our future. Right. So you see here with this description, notice that we're just highlighting what we see. We're not saying, oh, you're purposely ignoring me, or you're intentionally making me feel bad by tuning me out. No, we're just describing what we see from a neutral stance. Now with the expression, notice the feelings that we own and articulate. The sadness, the loneliness, right? And again, we're still not blaming them for anything. We're just explaining how we feel. And now with the assertion, notice here that you're communicating clearly your request without making any apologies or reservations. And now finally, with the reinforcement here, notice here that you're explaining the value of your request for them to be more present. And so as we practice this technique, this DEAR technique, we're not just practicing a skill, but we're practicing owning our feelings and articulating our needs. And this is something we can replicate in different parts of our lives, whether it's at work. So this is a work example. Actually, no, this is not a work example. This is more of a relationship example, but you can apply this to a work context, a school context, and especially a home context as well. So with all that said, wonder if there are any questions about anything that we've explored today. I would invite anyone you feel free to unmute yourself and just share your thoughts, or you can also just share in the chat box as well. Yeah, it's good to have an acronym to sort of summarize everything. It kind of makes it easy for us to digest and understand and even apply. Okay, there's a question here. So couldn't the person say, I don't zone out? Isn't it kind of accusatory and not neutral? So in this instance, we're just, for the description, we're describing what we noticed, right? So I kind of agree with you. Maybe in this example, maybe we don't say zone out. Maybe we can say, I'm not sure, but I notice or feel like you're not really there, right? So it's like a little bit more speculative and more descriptive, because like you said, maybe the zone out is actually a bit more accusatory. So I actually agree with you. Thank you for that observation, right? Because I don't get this stuff perfect either. So really good. It shows you're really paying attention here. I'm just looking here for reinforce. We can share what we would gain, or would the focus be on what we would gain together? That's a good question. That's a good question. And I think in this case, actually, it would make more sense to reinforce the meaning of the person making the request of, maybe we could revise it as like, it would make me feel more valued in this relationship. I like everyone really practicing assertiveness here. Really using the space well. This is great. Okay, I'm just scrolling up here a bit. Okay, yeah, the delaying response. Yeah, it is a really good trick in a way, because it gives us that space to think and collect ourselves. Because in the moment, maybe that stress response is so so strong and overwhelming that it's hard to just kind of take a breather and come to our senses. I agree with that. Okay. All right. Any other takeaways? Just want to give one last chance for anyone who wants to share or ask a question. All right. If not, then I just want to say thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate everyone's presence, especially on such a lovely evening outside. And yeah, so I on behalf of Shift, want to yeah, so hope everyone has a good evening and a fabulous weekend.